going to join as well. So just a few more minutes and we will start. Thank you.
Andre, I see that Vincent Desiderio already joined us. Could you check also his connection, please?
Absolutely. Vincent, if you can hear us, maybe we can check your camera and your mic, if that's okay. I see that you are muted at present time, and here you are.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Yeah.
Perfect pictures behind you. Exactly. Very good for this workshop.
Do you know if I'll have the ability to share my screen? It looks like I don't at the moment.
It looks like you don't, unfortunately. We've seen that at the top right, I mean, the share button is disabled. So I will have actually to go through the PDF that you've sent to me. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Please bear with us another maybe 1 minute. We are still getting more people joining the webinar, so we'll give it another 1 or 2 minutes for them to connect, and then we will definitely start. Thank you. All right then. Again, good morning to all. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is André Majerus. I'm working at IATA as the head of e-commerce and cargo operations. And this, of course, comprises mail. And we have decided together with my colleague Jan Bożnanski from the Universal Postal Union to organize a second webinar. We had a previous one in September last year, creating some awareness about the mail activities. And we wanted to go a little bit more into detail on 3 of our activities regarding safety, upcoming regulations, and also e-commerce. So I'll show you a little bit of the agenda later on. To just start and do a little welcoming presentation. Some of you may know what IATA is. IATA is the International Air Transport Association, and we deliver solution services, standards to our airline members. But we, of course, also partner with all the other sides of the industry to make sure that we are aligned. As you may have briefly seen, yeah, here it is on the on this slide. We are bounded by the competition law guidelines, so there are some discussions and some questions that we cannot have on this webinar. Everything that is related to prices, charges, markets, and so on, airline costs, postal cost surcharges, capacities, commercial information, and so on. This is definitely not what we intend to do on this webinar. So we won't have any of that discussion in here. But we would like to provide, of course, awareness. For some of you, so what you may not know about IATA is that we represent plus minus 290 airlines, maybe 300 today. And those 290 plus airlines represent around 83% of the world's air traffic, also representing 35% of the global trade by value. What we have today is that the value of cargo moved by air represents around $5.9 trillion US, 35% of the total world trade, as we said, but only representing 1% by volume. So volume-wise, very small, but value-wise, very large. What IATA does is serving the industry, the airline industry, but also our partners by creating the standards for the industry, make sure that we work all the same way, in a harmonized way. We provide advocacy, of course, and solutions for the various challenges that we face. This is a very short picture of what we do within our cargo and mail team. I won't go into any detail here. Anyway, these presentations will be shared afterwards, so you could have a closer look. But actually, we do have at the very top what we call the Cargo Services Conference that provides guidance to 6 of our boards related to different activities in the cargo world. And we do have, you can see on the very left-hand side, an airmail board. Our chairman, Billy Roach from American Airlines, is currently the chairman. And we do communicate and work very, very actively with the Universal Postal Union and its postal members to find, again, standards and solutions that would fit both parties so that we are aligned and can work well together. IATA works with other parties as well. Here you have quite a bunch of them. But we always try to strive for a common consensus. The objective of this webinar is, again, to create awareness. We would like everyone to know more about the mail activities. And this time, as I mentioned, we are going to focus on 3 areas. Safety, obviously. There are some prohibited items that are sometimes traveling in the mail, and we would like to make sure that it will not pose any problems during transport. Another session on electronic advanced data, EAD requirements, particularly in the case of the upcoming regulation in the European Union called EU ICS 2. And then finally, we'll go into some e-commerce discussions. Let's see what the challenges are in this area and the opportunities. So that's basically, in a nutshell, IATA and the objective of this webinar, but I will immediately give the floor to my colleague Jan Bożnanski from the UPU for a small introduction. Jan, I think you can go on.
Thank you very much. I hope that everything is okay and you can hear me well. Thanks for your introduction, and I'd like to say a few words also about the Universal Postal Union. For those of you who are participating first time or has no experience with the UPU until now. On the next slide, I'd like to share with you a few information about the Universal Postal Union. It's a United Nations specialized agency since 1948. With 192 member countries. Our members are not POS or designated operators, but our members are member countries, even if we are working mostly in close cooperation with designated operators. As you can see, our network has a few hundreds of thousands post offices with more than 5 million employees. And more than 80% of mail traffic comes from the industrialized countries. Our main role is to take care about regulating worldwide traffic of international mail, establish standards, technical standards, quality of service standards, all standards related to mail. Of course, take care about system of for compensation countries, as known as a terminal dues. And of course, we do our best to promote the development of modern product services, take care about monitoring market trends, legal requirements coming more and more, and promoting international cooperation and assistance. Of course, we try to also improve the dialogue among all postal sector players. It means carriers, customs, handling agents, international organizations, associations, regulators, and of course, post. Maybe I'd like to mention that my role is not only as a transport program manager within in the international bureau, but we are taking care also about the IATA UPU contact committee. It was not mentioned yet by Andre. So this contact committee serves as I would say, as a principal point of liaison between IATA and the UPU to address issues of common interest, and in particular seek the means of methods of expediting the transport of UPU airmail in a safe and secure manner. So through this committee, we are preparing some solutions. We are trying to do our best to prepare our members ready for all challenges. On the next slide, we can mention just a few of these key challenges. I don't want to speak too much about it. I'd like just to say that the main goal is really to prepare our members to meet all these challenges, even if it's not easy due to the COVID period, or as you see, we have some conflicts, which makes this mission even more complicated. Today, as you can see, the three main pillars of the supply chain managed by International Bureau is security, customs, and transport. And we will speak about each of them today, because the first block of presentation focused on safety is exactly the part I am referring to. Then we will speak also about the electronic advanced data. It is the second block of EAD presentations. And even if it's not related purely to the customs, I think I could say it's transversal topic related to all of these three pillars. And we will speak about that today. On the next slide, I'd like just to mention a few regulatory challenges related to the mail transport. Still more and more you can see challenges relating to the protection of the data or regulation on cross-border parcel delivery. But still more and more these challenges are coming due to the electronic advanced data. And many regulations coming from ICAO or WCO, known as a joint WCO-ICAO guiding principles for PLACI, but also from member countries. You know very well some regulations like air cargo advance screening, ACAS from US, or in Canada, it's preloading air cargo targeting, known as a PACT. ICS2 was already mentioned by Andre, coming from European Union. And I maybe could mention also regulation in the United Kingdom, pre-departure information for cargo targeting, so known as a PREDICT. So we are really facing many challenges. That's the reason why we are on the next slide trying to align to meet all of these challenges, but also align our processes. We have different standards when we speak about carriers, when we speak about ground handling engines and post, but there is a lot of similarities, and that's the reason why we try to align them. We created together, together, when I speak together, I mean ICAO, IATA, WCO, UPU, European Commission. We prepared together the global postal model. It will be mentioned during the presentation, one of the, today's presentations, so I will not speak in details, but I'd like just to mention that we will really do our best to present the best ideas, to share these ideas with you, and continue in this capacity building activities, I would say. During the first webinar, we presented framework of Postal Service Agreement. We presented Electronic Consignment Security Declaration activity. We were presenting one of the solutions to convert carded messages, and we will continue today with some other topics which are, I think, very important. Even if in some presentation, you will see that we are still not able to present the final solutions. We are presenting just the ideas, and this webinar could serve also as a platform to share these ideas and to find the final solution together. So I think that's all from my side, and I wish the successful workshop or webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. So just in a nutshell, to show you a little bit about the agenda for today, and then we will dive immediately into the topics. We will have 3 parts, as I mentioned. Safety, #1 priority. So we'll look at presentations from USPIS, ICAO, and KLM. We'll go into these regulatory requirements on electronic advanced data filing. We'll have presentation from PostNL, KLM, UPU, and lec2.com. And then we'll end up with the e-commerce challenge. IATA and PostNord will give you some information on that. So I think we can start immediately. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Vincent Desiderio, who is working at USPIS. Vincent, I will let you introduce yourself and drive us through the presentation. You tell me when I go to another slide, right? Thank you, Vincent.
All right. Thank you, Andre. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I just want to first start off by thanking Andre and Jan, IATA, and the UPU for the opportunity to present to you today during this important webinar. If we could jump to the next slide. My name is Vinny Desiderio. I'm the Hazmat Program Specialist for the United States Postal Inspection Service. I'm a civilian member of a federal law enforcement agency that is tasked with upholding laws relating to the United States Postal Service. We're kind of in a unique position to have basically 1,200 dedicated women and men who serve as federal law enforcement agencies protecting the mail in the United States. In alignment with the mission of our postal inspectors, the mission of our Hazmat program is to protect the U.S. Postal Service, its employees, customers, business partners, and infrastructure from threats posed by undeclared and improperly prepared dangerous goods in the mail. And I know some of you are seeing a little bit of a distinguishment here between hazmat and dangerous goods. In the United States, we tend to use the term hazardous materials and hazmat, which is synonymous with dangerous goods, which is the more globally used term. If we can jump to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lithium batteries and the importance of compliant shipping in the international post. We all know that lithium batteries have a major importance within commerce in general, and they play a significant role in e-commerce in particular, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later in the presentation. But this is primarily due to some advantageous properties of these materials, and they have continually greater economic importance as we delve deeper into the wireless world. There's, just about every item in our homes and in our environment now are powered by some form of lithium battery in one way or another. Anything that's electronic probably has a lithium battery within it. They have some really great properties that make them economically important. For one thing, they're very long lasting. Some forms of them are rechargeable. We'll talk a little bit more about that. They have a very high energy density, which yields excellent storage capability in a very small space. They're lightweight. If you think about your old style nickel cadmium battery in your drill, if you were doing a lot of work, your arm would get tired pretty quick. Lithium batteries are a lot lighter, so they're a lot easier to handle and they last a lot longer as well. There's also many formats available that are adaptable, the size and space available, which makes them flexible for use in a really wide range of applications. Next slide, please. Lithium batteries come in two different flavors, if you will, and those are lithium metal batteries and lithium ion batteries. And what you see on the screen here are just some examples of lithium metal batteries. Lithium metal batteries have use as excellent replacements for standard alkaline or dry cell chemical batteries. And then you have the smaller watch cell type batteries on the right-hand side. These are known as cells, and I'll get more into the terminology on the next slide. But you can have cells and batteries. And as we jump to that next slide, what we see here are some lithium ion cells. The lithium ion cells and batteries are long lasting. They're rechargeable in comparison to lithium metal batteries, which are not, but they're also size adaptable. So when you think about things like your earpod type devices, there's very small lithium ion batteries that are in there that maintain quite a long lasting charge and make them very useful. So with respect to terminology, there's that term cell versus battery. So what is a cell? A cell is an individual chemical unit, electrochemical unit. And cells on their own can be used to power a device. And in that situation, they would be termed a single cell battery. I know this is confusing, but that's just the way things are. So single cell batteries are often found in things like cell phones, some tablet devices, but that's changing a little bit and we're moving more into the battery. There are three primary varieties of cells. If you go from left to right on the screen, we have the cylindrical cell. In the middle, we have a pouch cell. And on the right side, we have prismatic cells. If we jump to the next slide, these things can be assembled to form batteries. So batteries or lithium ion batteries are basically two or more cells wired in series with one another to produce that battery. If we go from left to right on this screen, you have a standard laptop battery that is a bunch of cells that are wired together, cylindrical cells in that case. In the middle, a tablet battery that are two pouch cells wired together. And then on the right side, we have the prismatic cells, as you can see that they're wired together in series to produce a larger electrochemical unit consisting of those cells. And something like that would be used to power something like a vehicle or for structural purpose for energy storage. Next slide, please. The purpose of this slide is just to show that there's a wide variety of sizes and shapes that have different power available to them. And power with respect to lithium batteries is measured in watt hours. And watt hours is obtained by just multiplying the voltage times the current capability of the battery, which is measured in ampere hours or milliampere hours. On the left-hand side, we have some very small lithium batteries with 0.1 watt-hour capability. That's the type of thing that you might find in something like your earpod type device. But as we go through that spectrum, you see that power continually increases. We go from cells to batteries. And then on the right side, we have very large lithium batteries that are capable of storing up to 5,000 or more watt-hours of energy. So there's a lot of energy storage capability, but one thing that I want to note is the risk with respect to transportation increases exponentially as you go towards the right side of that spectrum. Next slide, please. This is just a placeholder, so we can get into how lithium batteries are regulated. If we go to the next slide. International recommendations are put forth in the UN model regulations, that serve as the foundation for international regulations. As we proceed from left to right, you go from the UN model regulations that put forth those recommendations into more specific regulations that are put forth by agencies on an international level, such as ICAO, IATA, IMDG, which oversees sea transportation. And then you start getting into the regional and national regulations like the ADR in the United States. We're under 49 CFR. And on the right-hand side, we have our localized regulations with respect to the post. The regulations tend to become more restrictive as you go from left to right on this screen, with postal regulations serving as some of the more restrictive regulations that are out there for good reason. And I'll get to that in a second. If we jump to the next slide, please, we're going to talk about lithium batteries specifically. So there's a couple different UN numbers that we are concerned with respect to the shipment of lithium batteries. And lithium metal batteries fall under UN 3090, being lithium metal batteries that are shipped on their own, just lithium batteries that are packed without any equipment. UN 3091 serving as the UN designation for lithium metal batteries that are either contained in equipment or packed with equipment. And then we have UN 3480, which are lithium-ion batteries that are shipped on their own. And then UN 3481 being lithium-ion batteries that are either packed with equipment or contained in the equipment that they're intended to operate. Next slide, please. This is just showing what our postal regulations are here in the United States on the domestic side. Basically, UN 3480 and UN 3090 lithium batteries that are packed on their own, are prohibited in air transportation. There's also some very strict watt-hour limitations and power limitations on the batteries. We do allow shipment of UN 3481 packed with and contained in equipment, and UN 3091 packed with and contained in equipment in air transportation, but they're basically limited to the section 2 of their respective packing instructions. But as we proceed to the right on the international level, and this is agreed upon internationally, for any countries that accept the shipment of lithium batteries, they're limited to only equipment containing lithium batteries, or UN 3481, UN 3091 shipments that the lithium batteries are actually contained in the equipment that they're intended to operate, and that limitation is very strict, being 4 cells or 2 batteries in both instances. So I want to get into why this is important to really discuss this safety matter. So if we can jump to the next slide. So lithium batteries, if improperly handled, stored, treated, or if they're poorly constructed, they can short circuit and go into what is known as thermal runaway. And thermal runaway is basically the generation of heat, which produces pressure inside the cell, which will eventually rupture. And once that flammable electrolyte is turned into a gaseous medium, it'll ignite because the temperature of the device is over the ignition temperature of the electrolyte itself. This is highly problematic because it's going to lead to fires and cause explosions. In the case of batteries, when you have multiple cells that are connected to one another, you can get a propagation of that fire or the explosive capability of that battery from cell to cell, which makes these fires very difficult to extinguish. Obviously, this is a major concern in transportation, especially air transportation, for obvious reasons. Therefore, there's a great deal of scrutiny and attention that's placed on these batteries for good reason. And the next slide shows some of these reasons, and I can't go through. If we can go back to that one, Andre. These are actual incidents that have occurred over the past few years within the United States Postal Service networks, some of them involving air transportation, and it's a very scary proposition. I can't tell you that these were all non-compliant shipments. They were either undeclared lithium batteries, they were improperly entered into air transportation. Some of them were damaged and being returned to the original shipper. So there's various circumstances surrounding these things. If we look at the top right side, that's a situation involving a power bank. Some people think that those are UN 3481 devices where the batteries contained in the equipment is intended to operate. That is not the case. That's actually a UN 3480 lithium-ion battery. And Andre, I don't know if we can play the video on the next slide. I did try to send it to you.
Did you send it to me by email?
Yes.
Ah, okay, then let me
Yeah, I
have a
just
look at that.
a couple
Sure.
minutes ago.
Absolutely, sorry, I didn't see that coming. Here we go. So let me just open that.
See if technology comes through for us.
I think it should work. I'm just going to pause it just for a sec, and then I'll share my screen again. Here we are in a sec. Here it is. Can you see it?
Not yet. Okay.
Yes,
Looks
we
like it's
can.
coming up. All right, so what you see here is a screening operation at our Los Angeles facility. One of our airlines operates this operation. They saw what was an obvious lithium battery in a sack. That sack was placed in the container, and you can see the result of that. And we'll let this play just for a few seconds more, because what I want to show you is the difficulty that the folks in this facility have in putting this fire out. So this was an undeclared e-bike battery. I showed that spectrum a few minutes ago. This was more towards the right side of that spectrum. So we're looking at about a 1200 watt hour battery. That would be a Section 1 battery, would require UN specification packaging, specific marking requirements, but more importantly, it's completely prohibited in the post. If we could stop there. And just go to the next slide. I'm going to try to get through these next 3 slides pretty quick. I intended on keeping them out, but there are a couple points that I'll try to make. Ultimately, there's a shared responsibility here, and it starts really with the raw materials and the manufacture of these batteries. So ideally, we would have high quality batteries that are being manufactured that would enter into commerce. The shippers and the public need to be aware of the dangers that are associated with these materials. I don't think a lot of people realize that some of the things that they're carrying around in their pocket are actually regulated hazardous materials or dangerous goods. Our goal ultimately is to keep these things off of aircraft, and that is going to take a village. Next slide, please. What I threw on here is just basically a risk spectrum of different shipper types. We can skip this, but I do want to get to the next slide and just talk about the point that there's a nexus here that we need to concentrate on. And a lot of this webinar focuses on the importance of e-commerce, and e-commerce has basically democratized commerce in general. So there's a lot of people out there that are now shipping things that if they are unaware of the hazards associated with them, and lithium batteries are definitely a good example of that. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be directed towards educating some of that sector in order to make them knowledgeable of the fact that these things are hazardous. If we can go to the next slide, and actually you can skip, we're going to just discuss a few resources and initiatives that are out there. So there is a lot of effort being put forth to do just what I was talking about a second ago, and that's educating the public and e-commerce vendors in particular with respect to the hazards that are associated with lithium batteries, making sure that people are shipping these things in a safe and compliant manner. I don't think anybody's done more work than that than I in that area than IATA. And there's some excellent guidance out there, and this guidance document, which is updated on an annual basis, is really a tremendous resource for anybody looking for some pretty simple guidance on what lithium batteries are and how to enter them into transportation. On the right side of the screen, you'll see just a flow chart for lithium-ion battery preparation and shipment. It's just a really great way to navigate that situation. And then if we can get to the next slide, which is my last slide of content, the Universal Postal Union is putting forth a great deal of effort as well. In conjunction with both IATA and ICAO, there's a couple of contact committees that are concentrating efforts into this area. And some of those things that I just wanted to highlight really quick are IATA UPU contact committee's efforts towards dangerous goods training. There's a huge emphasis that was just all recently updated with a huge emphasis on lithium batteries in transportation. The IATA UPU mail safety guidelines, and if you look down at the bottom, there's a link for that. That was a tremendous collaboration between the two groups to just kind of outline some of the risks that are out there. And there was a tremendous emphasis, once again, on lithium-ion batteries, lithium batteries in general, in that document. The UPU is undergoing a really great project. I see Stefan's online here in the group attending this webinar. His group is putting together a dangerous goods search tool to identify not only lithium-ion batteries or lithium metal batteries. I'm sorry, do I? But just proactively identify these things as they enter the post and make sure that we're keeping track of these things and keeping out things that are not compliant. There's also the equipment containing lithium batteries roadmap. That's a project that is being put forth through the IATA UPU Contact Committee as well. And that's to help bring other posts around the world online with respect to knowledge of lithium batteries and the shipment, and give them the ability to transport those things through the post in a safe and compliant manner. And the last thing that I want to highlight is a collaborative effort that's being spearheaded by Underwriters Laboratory with participation by the UPU, ICAO, and various agencies around the world. And this training is set to be released in just a couple of months, sometime probably early summer. And the focus on there is for law enforcement purposes and making sure that batteries are being shipped safely and compliantly, but also making sure that we're keeping track of things like counterfeit batteries, which seem to be a big issue. A lot of the things that I showed on that screen a couple minutes ago involving all those different incidents involve things like counterfeit batteries or poorly constructed batteries. So that training is being put forth to help address those issues. With all that being said, my last slide, I'd just like to thank everybody for the opportunity to present today. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. If you have any questions about the incidents in particular, I wouldn't mind talking to anybody on an individual basis about that. So once again, thank you, Andre. Thank you, Jan, for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Vinny, for that, and thank you for your efforts, for your passion and commitment, I guess, on safety. We know for a fact that you are extremely active on the USPIS side to make sure that everyone is educated, as you said. I just discovered this morning on LinkedIn some kind of an information page that that different companies can access regarding hazmat and how to actually identify and declare the hazmat and how to make sure that it's safe for transport. So I would strongly recommend that you also maybe just share the link of that LinkedIn post in the chat maybe here, because I think that would be of good interest of everyone. And second, just going back to the incidents that you've shown, the pictures are obviously very impressive. The video is impressive as well. But I have to remind everyone that for now, I think we've been extremely lucky. Lucky that all of this only happened on the ground. We never really had an official, let's say, accident related to lithium batteries on an airplane in the air, and hopefully it will never happen. So that's why it's what we do on the ground that will make sure that our flight is safe. And do not forget that mail is not only transported on cargo planes, it is also transported and mainly transported on passenger planes. So that means that you have loads of passengers, families and friends which are just above those receptacles containing the mail, and it's a combined effort of individuals and organizations and authorities to make sure that everyone is safe. So again, thank you very much, Vinny, for that. Is there any question or any comment from anyone here on the webinar? If not, I think we can move on. Thank you, Vinny, again. We will move on with the next presentation. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Captain Ian Knowles from ICAO. I'm going to share the presentation right now. So Ian, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Yes, my name is Ian Knowles. I'm the Acting Chief of the Operational Safety Section at ICAO. My responsibilities, apart from acting as the Chief of the section currently, are primarily in the flight operations area. So my responsibility mostly revolves around Annex 6 and the operation of aircraft. What I'm intending to present to you today is a quick overview of the new provisions that we have in Annex 6 Part 1. If we can skip to the next slide, please. and this concerns the safe operation of cargo compartments. So it'll be just a very quick introduction to the Annex 6 context to make sure we're all understanding what we're talking about. Quick review of the contents itself of Chapter 15, the cargo compartment safety. We'll look at the guidance that was written to accompany that, Doc 10102, the guidance for safe operations involving airplane cargo compartments. And then just a very quick touch on the complementary standards that are going into other annexes to support that work. Next slide, please. So the context then, Annex 6, and particularly Annex 6 Part 1, this is international commercial air transport for aeroplanes. So it's very specific remit. It's only talking about the type of aircraft that obviously the IATA members will be operating. We're not looking at smaller aircraft, general aviation, or indeed helicopters. So just the larger commercial air transport type aeroplanes. Next slide, please. So in terms of the cargo compartment safety, we have a new Chapter 15, which was added to the annex. It was adopted by the Council of ICAO in March 2020. Those provisions became applicable in November 2020. Essentially, what that is sorry, I'm losing my plot. Sorry. Along with that, those provisions which have been entered into Annex 6, there is, as I mentioned before, some guidance which is produced, and that goes into a little bit more detail. The guidance typically expands on what the provisions are, what they're intended to outline, and then some specific instructions and examples of how to apply those and how to use the risk assessments, etc. We're going to have a look a little bit later in this presentation on the guidance, so I'll come back to that. If we go to the next slide, please. So looking at the contents of Chapter 15 itself, there's essentially two elements to the provisions. So the first part of that is really the need for an operator to properly understand the risk involved and to take any appropriate mitigating actions that might be required. And then the second part of the Chapter 15 is the need to make sure that the relevant information is being made available to the operator to allow them to do that risk assessment process fully. The second part of that Chapter 15 requirement, talking about the need for the information to be made available, that's really handled from another angle. That comes through the Annex 8 provisions, which looks at the airworthiness of aircraft, and we'll touch on that at the end of the presentation towards the end. Moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned, the first part of the provisions in Chapter 15 talk about the need for an operator to do risk assessment. I apologise, there's a little bit of unnecessary animation on there, which I tried to remove. If we can just click it once more, I think, to get everything up. And maybe again. There we go. So the operator's risk assessment. Well, first thing we need to understand is that this Chapter 15 provision actually really stemmed from the initial considerations of the lithium battery risk in the cargo compartment. And as we saw in the first presentation today, there's a lot of work being done in that area. There's genuine concern about the transport of lithium batteries. However, following on from the work that was done to quantify and to mitigate the lithium battery risk, there's been an understanding that actually there may be some additional risks which are not, in fact, sufficiently mitigated, and that results in a need to do a full and complete risk assessment for the carriage of items in the cargo compartment. Now, we need to be clear that when we're talking about carriage of items, we're talking about essentially everything that goes into the cargo compartment. It's not just cargo. It could be cargo, it could be comat, it could be baggage, and it does include mail. The idea being that whatever goes into the cargo compartment is contained in that area and will need to be ultimately made safe by whatever means necessary. So the development of Chapter 15 really looked at the risks that were associated with the inherent properties of the items that are going into the compartment. So it's looking at the things such as the risk of explosion, the risk of fire, the chemical hazard risk, toxicity, etc. What it doesn't do, what it doesn't refer to at all, is risks in terms of incorrect loading and fastening. So it's not about the shifting of the center of gravity or the way in which the items are put into the hold. It's about the properties of the items themselves. Next slide, please. And again, some slightly random animation coming up there. So in terms of the risk assessment by the operator, then the intent is that this would be conducted through the operator's safety management system. And along with that, it does also require that the operator would have established a reliable reporting practice to both identify issues and feed that information back into the safety management system. The primary focus really in this case is due to fire, and that's really because this whole discussion came about from some consideration of the capabilities of the cargo compartment fire suppression system. And this really is the reason why the Chapter 15 standards, that second part, talks about the provision of information on the fire suppression capabilities that's required to be placed in the aircraft flying manual. So it's really mostly about that. The idea really from discussions that, again, started with the lithium battery issue, is about whether or not we're actually considering the system of the aeroplane as a whole. So when we put all these items in the cargo compartment, we put mail and baggage and freight and everything in there, that whether or not we are still keeping within the limits of what the cargo compartment fire suppression system was originally designed and certified to do. Because there is an understanding that actually there are certain situations where the combination of items that goes into that hole potentially could be more than the fire suppression system can cope with, and that's clearly not a situation that we ever want to happen. So obviously, when we're looking at what's going into the hold, there's a main, the main consideration is that the items that we're putting in there could form essentially a fuel source. So there's packaging from containers, there's baggage contents, etc. And we're looking at the potential for additional items to be in there. So we're not really addressing the carriage of dangerous goods. That's dangerous goods is really well covered already by Chapter 14 of Annex 6 and also by the technical instructions. And so what we're looking at is kind of additional items in the hold, which don't really classify as dangerous goods, but they could be carried on board by passengers who really are not really aware of the risks. Things like perfume bottles and deodorant that comes in pressurized containers and stuff that really could just essentially contribute and fuel a fire in the hold. And then as the volume of that material increases and the fire takes hold, it could potentially become overwhelming and overwhelm the fire suppression system. And that's really the concern that led to this Chapter 15 development in the first place. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the standards in Chapter 15 do require that the operator conduct a risk assessment. It should be clear, first of all, that this assessment is based on the type of operation. So the intention is not that every individual flight would have a risk assessment conducted on the specific contents of the airplane. It's about the general operation. So it's about, for example, where the baggage comes from, what processes are in place to inform the passengers, what freight forwarders are being used, how well the operator has a relationship with them, etc. So it's not specifically flight by flight what's going into this hold on this aircraft. It's about the type of operation that's being conducted. Is it a passenger operation? Is it a cargo operation? Is it a mixed flight? Excuse me. And so with that in mind, really the main priority for doing a new risk assessment would be for a new type of operation. So if an operator had predominantly passenger service and if they wanted to start up cargo operations, and clearly that's a different type of operation. There would be a new risk assessment that would be needed to look at the risk for what was going on with that aeroplane. Also, it's recommended that a periodic review would be done from time to time, just to make sure that the original assumptions and the original information that went into that risk assessment are still valid. Moving on to the next slide, please. So the details of the kind of the minimum requirements, the elements of the risk assessment are described in Chapter 15. It's not intended really, when you read that list, it's not the intent that the operator would be responsible to regulate other individuals. Okay, so we talk about the risk assessment, looking at various elements, and one of those elements is the safety and security of the supply chain. The intent is not that the operator suddenly becomes responsible for that. That's not what it says. The requirement is for the operator to consider and understand the risk to them, and that any potential mitigation strategies are put in place to try to minimize that risk and make sure that we're conducting as safe an operation as possible. So following the identification of various hazards and their consequences, then obviously mitigation can be identified, and the guidance that we'll come to in just a second does talk through what some of those are and looks at how those can be put in place and what they can do and how they can be used. Moving on to the next slide, please. So Doc 10102, the guidance for the safe operations involving aeroplane cargo holds, is the main kind of complementary information that goes along with these standards in Chapter 15 to Annex 6. So it talks in quite a bit more detail about what those hazards might be for the carriage of items in the cargo compartment. It talks about the various elements that are listed in Chapter 15 for the risk assessment and what those actually are in a little bit more detail, and then it goes into some more detail about what potential mitigations the operator might consider, having run through this risk assessment, should they find that there is a risk which is not falling into the acceptable risk category. Next slide, please. So as an example then, and one that comes up quite a lot, there is an element in that risk assessment list in Chapter 15, which talks about the supply chain. So obviously the operator themselves doesn't have a direct influence on the safety of the supply chain. So what the risk assessment is proposing, what the guidance describes, is the operator can consider what the risks are that might be introduced, and they might decide to amend or limit agreements as appropriate. They may decide, for example, that certain freight forwarders or certain providers maybe aren't following the rules as well as they could be, and maybe the operator might decide actually they don't want to accept shipments from them. They might identify one or more entities within the supply chain and work with them to develop a mutual risk control strategy. That could include restrictions on the specific types of cargo that are offered for carriage by air. It could include obligations on the forwarder to act as a customer of the airline to make sure that they're applying adequate control and safety considerations earlier on in the supply chain. It would certainly include ensuring there are adequate processes for identifying undeclared dangerous goods at all points through the route, and it might include having a requirement that every entity have their own data monitoring process and data sharing with others in that chain. So again, it's not about trying to manage or putting the operator as responsible for that whole supply chain area. It's about the operator understanding where the freight or the cargo or mail is coming from, and working where appropriate and where possible to try and put in place agreements and processes to limit the risk of what they're ultimately putting on their aircraft. Because at the end of the day, the operator is responsible excuse me, for putting that on the aircraft and for the safety of that aircraft. Next slide, please. So as a second example, then, if we look at the passenger baggage, I mentioned before that some items in the passenger baggage could act very effectively as fuel for a fire in the cargo compartment. It is difficult to control directly or even sometimes be aware of what the passenger is packing in their baggage. We mentioned before bottles of perfume, lithium batteries, either in equipment or spare batteries for recharging, pressurized containers, all of these things potentially could be fuel sources or sources of potential ignition in the cargo compartment. And again, the bulk quantity of items carried in the hold could potentially end up in a situation which overwhelms the fire suppression capabilities. And so what we're looking here again is the operator's means to try and mitigate that, and mitigation in this case could be, for example, to ensure additional awareness for passengers that there are certain items that should not be in checked baggage, for example. There are items that are okay if they're packed properly or they're prepared in a certain way. We need to make sure that the staff at both check-in and all stages throughout the passenger journey are clear about the risk, and that they are able to offer advice and information to the passengers when needed. So again, it's not so much that the operator has to control what's in the passenger baggage, but there are mitigation strategies, and plenty of operators are using a lot of these already to try and make sure that the risk is mitigated adequately, and making sure the passengers are aware, they're well informed, and they can get the information they need easily. Final option there is that there could be consideration of screening. Now, obviously, the primary use for screening right now at the moment is for security and looking for potential security risks to the aircraft. It's possible that safety screening could also be introduced or could be considered And again, it would depend a little bit on the operator's risk assessment of that operation, or how well they think their mitigations in these other items are working for the passenger awareness and training, and whether or not they consider it's something that really does need to be addressed. And if so, then there is a possibility to consider screening for the safety purpose. And again, the guidance talks a little bit about that and about how that could work. Okay, next slide, please. So in chapter 15, as I mentioned at the beginning, the first section there looks at the operator's requirement to conduct a risk assessment, and the second section talks about the need for that information to be available. So it essentially puts a requirement on the design approval holders, either type certificate or supplementary type certificate, to provide information that the operator can use to conduct their risk assessment. And it's about them giving the information on the capabilities of the cargo fire suppression system so that they can factor that into their risk assessment. Fire, again, is the primary hazard, and that's why we keep coming back to it. Chapter 15 requires that this information be presented in the aircraft flying manual where it can be seen and used by the operators. Moving on to the next slide, please. So in the guidance material, again, in .10102, it talks a little bit about what this information is, describes the classification of the different types of cargo compartments, and have some brief descriptions. An example, I know you can't read that, it's not really the intent, but the example would be for a Class C cargo compartment would include automatic fire detection. It would have crew-activated fire suppression systems, built-in suppression, etc. So it describes the general capabilities and what it's essentially designed to do. Additionally, what we're looking for provision from the type design holder is the certification standards that were used to approve the cargo compartment fire suppression system. And that will consider various items. Those standards talk about various things such as whether or not the compartment is accessible by the crew, whether there's adequate prevention of smoke and suppression of agents from getting into the cabin and crew areas, how well the agent dissipates. So all those elements are considered at the certification stage, and that's the kind of information then that can be provided for the operator to consider how well the specific cargo compartment that they're operating with will function. And again, that feeds into the risk assessment that they're required to conduct. Last and final slide, please. So just a very quick note that although this information, the requirement to provide that information, the cargo compartment fire suppression system, is in Annex 6. Annex 6 is predominantly concerned with the operation of the aircraft, and so actually where we really need this information is Annex 8. And there is a change to the annex coming in. It will be applicable November 2022, so this year, and it requires that the demonstrated standards that were considered in the process of certification are both put into the aircraft documentation, typically the AFM, but it could be other documents, and also made available to the operator. And essentially made available means that they should be able to go and get that information and find out more. They should be able to request more detail from the type certification holder if necessary, and follow up. So again, the whole process is operator conducts a risk assessment on an operation basis, not a flight basis, considers all the risks to gathering all this material and putting it into the cargo hold, considers the capabilities of the cargo hold itself based on the information from the type design holder, and using all that information is then able via the safety management system to consider appropriate mitigations that might need to be put in place to try and just improve and increase the safety of the operation as a whole. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Very interesting presentation. I mean, this tool, Annex 6, Chapter 15, is certainly will certainly help operators to have another layer of safety by doing those risk assessments on their business partners. So it's quite important, I would say. May I maybe add some fuel to the fire? I don't know if it's something I am allowed to do or not, but I will anyway. Ian, you were talking about safety screening when on the slide regarding passenger baggage and so on. Would you see some kind of, let's say, initiative also happening at ICAO regarding safety screening on cargo and mail? Is that something that is in the pipeline somehow? And because I know, you see, we always talk about security mandatory, safety recommended. So at some point, we see that lithium batteries can have a devastating effect on planes. And I was just wondering, what is ICAO's view on safety actually compared to security? Sorry for that.
So, yeah, it's not a problem at all. No, I will be careful not to commit ourselves too much. But so right now there's nothing in place that we're working on that is.
Ian, I think we lost you, or ICAO decided to cut your answer. I don't know. Ian, can you hear us? I think we lost you, Ian. Oh, that's a pity. So I guess we'll have to wait. Maybe he's going to reconnect. Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, Ian is gone. We'll see later on if he reconnects. Maybe we'll have an opportunity at asking the same question again. Otherwise, I promise I will follow up with that question, and I will get back to you all in when we post the recording of this webinar. I will also post the various questions and answers that we've received. So, okay, let's finish with that presentation here. I would like to just ask Ed Boone, are you with us on the call? You're next in line. Yes, you are. Here we are. Excellent. Okay, so let me just launch your presentation. I will let you introduce yourself, and then I will go through the slides. So you just need to tell me to go next. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Andre. Indeed, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ed Boone. I'm the operational safety manager for KLM Cargo. And that covers also basically the policy making for dangerous goods. Dangerous goods is, of course, something that is used throughout the whole organization. Basically, I do this for the entire KLM, also concerning passenger transport. But of course, while the heavy lifting of dangerous goods is done in cargo, we have implemented this in the cargo division for already quite a few years. Also, my colleague Arnoud Winke would be in this call to help me out a little when discussions may end up concerning actual UPU processes, fortunately, this is not really what I'm about. It's not my domain. We'll know a little bit of it. Fortunately, my colleague, Mr. Bernard Heuseveld, is also in the call, so he would step in if needed. Then again, I was asked to say something on the ICAO Annex 6 discussion that we heard already pretty much about from the last speaker, but now from an operator perspective. And perhaps I can start with the finishing touch of the last discussion, screening cargo from a safety perspective. And I really hope that Mr. Knowles will be stepping in to let us know the current ICAO viewpoint of that, because from an operator perspective, I can already tell you we want this. If we can have the next slide, please, Andrea. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And my presentation was set up concerning Annex 6. So I would also like to say a little bit about the beginning of this whole endeavor. Of course, Mr. Knowles already covered it pretty well. However, I would like to point out that we started this whole discussion in 2017, I believe, with basically a security concern. And the security concern of 10, first 7, later 10 origins somewhere in the world en route to the US and later on the UK, I believe, were coming from a security threat, so to speak. And the discussion was that large PEDs should be banned in the cabin. And by that, basically, you say end up in the cargo hold as checked baggage. Now, this posed a whole lot of other problems and discussions, which I shall not get into. But the point is, and that is stated here in this sheet, which is a picture from the European Cockpit Association, which at that time stated basically also the worry of the Dangerous Goods Panel and the Dangerous Goods Board for IATA. What happens if we do that? What can we say about the safety risk in this perspective? While we all know that are pretty strict standards and restrictions that lithium batteries, because that we're talking about, need to be insured. And how do you do that with a passenger-owned property, which is taken in basically at the check-in desk? We don't know anything about it. We don't know anything about the packing and so on. So this triggered the discussion, which basically ended up, if I can have the next slide, Andre, in what Mr. Knowles also already explained, the Annex 6, Chapter 15. Now, for an operator, there are a few worries about it, because, as I said, we are coming from a security threat, ending up in a safety discussion on lithium batteries, and then all of a sudden, 2 years later, ending up with the mandatory risk assessment on anything or everything that we put in the hold. And if we go a little further down the line, in items F and G, worried about packing and packaging, but also, and that is really important, of course, the safety of the supply chain. And the answer of an operator in that respect will be how? How can I do this? How should I do this? And basically, what Mr. Knowles said in his presentation on the operator not being a regulator or not requested to take up regulating procedures, that we understand, of course, but for a proper risk assessment, we need to know what is in the aircraft. And if we want to know and need to know what is in the aircraft, we also need to know how this is arranged from the start of the manufacturing process until we put it on board. And it's basically also coming down on know your customer. And know your customer is, if you dig into that, looking quite a lot like doing audits or inspections. And doing audits and inspections already look a lot like regulatory checks on how do we do things. Can I have the next slide, Andre? And this is an example of what we are encountering. It's basically a shipment on airway bill, but we are looking at a hybrid scenario, because what we see here as an airway bill shipment, cargo shipment, is basically mail. It is not transported as mail, however, so we don't have the mail documentation that we normally would have. Also, this is not allowed, by the way, but when you do it on an airway bill. But what we're looking here for is basically a shipment of multiple shippers. So that would mean a consolidation without houseway bills, because we don't have that information. Also, as I said, no CN available, so that would also not be allowed, but we don't have it. Can even be considered co-loading. I'm not going for a detail into that, but co-loading is also one of the rather high risk situations, because it is a shipper renting space that he has at the airline to another shipper. And in terms of know your shipper, this is not something that the operator is very fond of, but we still have parts in the world where this is common business. And then again, this shipment becomes mail when it arrives on destination, and then it will be transported through the mail as well. So basically what we have here is a consolidation where we don't know what is in it. So if these are, and I know we don't do risk assessments on flight level or certainly not on air bill level in this perspective. However, if these are flows, then you should be able to do a risk assessment on your customer and on the flow. We can't do that if it is done like this. In general mail situations, basically we have the same. Next slide. So what we have here, as I said, cargo on air bill is a consolidation on houseware bill level. That is already difficult enough. We have to have information of those houseware bills to make our assessments in all kinds of regulatory views. In this case, the houseware bill should in fact be, or is in fact, the receptacle. And receptacles, or mail is a consolidation on a receptacle level. And the receptacle, in our point of view, is a consolidation of postal items, which, by the way, nowadays 90% packages instead of old-fashioned letters, of course. So what I'm trying to point out here is that we have a consolidation on a consolidation, and if you will, on another consolidation. Basically, we don't know what's in it. Next slide. And that is worrisome. This is a slide that I did in the lithium battery workshop 2017 that IATA did in Amsterdam. Let's focus on the first one. That is what I've already said now a few times. All the items here are in our newly stated compliance commitments. And could be considered valid for this discussion, but for now we focus on the one. We have to know what we transport. What keeps me up at night is that I do not know what is in the aircraft, and I cannot do a proper risk assessment in that perspective. So next slide. And this poses another problem because while we are, as a transport company, as an operator, not obliged by the IATA, the ICAO conventions to exactly be responsible for what is in cargo shipments, what we see, and that is a little bit on the right side, we see governments, and especially the Dutch government, more and more looking at the transport company, the transport facilitator, to ensure that we know what we put in the aircraft. And of course, that for a regulator is more simple than looking at the whole supply chain themselves, because going after every shipper is much more difficult than going after the operator, who you regulate. Yeah, so we see also there an upbeat in that we are being held accountable even for what we transport. So next slide. And when looking to mail in that perspective, what we see coming is the ICS2, in which mail has to be forwarded to the regulating organizations, also basically on a piece level, to do some checks on it. Now, at that point, we still don't know what is in it, but at least we have a regulatory body who makes sure that checks are done on at least the data, and we can know a little bit more about the situation from a security perspective, because that is, of course, what this whole thing started. But we can perhaps use some of that. So next slide. Yeah. So the major question remains, looking at security, receptacles need 100% assessment complete in this ICS2 process. And we need to know, or we want to know actually, how this is arranged. How do we get the airline get the result also, so that we know what we transport, at least in terms of this perspective. And from a safety perspective, I already told you how we see it, but also in terms of looking at the supply chain and the starting point of it all. When it's cargo, it is the forwarder, of course, but when it is mail, it is the DPO. And also now the DPO comes into our view of working together and making assessments on how do they assess their customer, because we need to know that. And in terms of that discussion, we may be looking at a joint approach, security and safety, because we are screening from a safety perspective anyway. And we might need to be looking at making that screening domain a little bit larger also to check on security issues. I remember a investigation or at least a project, and perhaps it's even still running, that was done a few years ago by the Royal Mail on incoming mail. And when you put incoming mail to the scanner, they were certainly able to catch dangerous goods and lithium batteries in this perspective. So we know it is possible. And if we know it is possible, why don't we just do it? So in that perspective, I started my presentation with we want this, and this is exactly what I wanted to get across. We want to make a joint approach, as we are scanning anyway, scan the whole situation. Next slide. Because you cannot know everything on the level of the documentation or the statements that customers make. This is a recent fire in South Korea, which I also do not get into details, of course, but apparently from an investigation point of view, they were able to retrieve the list on a commodity level. And what you see here, you cannot find anything on dangerous goods or lithium battery. The evidence is burned anyway, but it is also not there. So you have to rely on wording that may be indicating dangerous issues or situations that led up to this incident. The pallet that you see on fire here is mail. So it is looking as a cargo pallet, but it is mail. Next slide. Again, back to the risk assessment that we started with. Annex 6, Chapter 15 is all about deciding risk. But no matter how you look at it, risk is no more, no less than an assessment of the chance of anything happening and the effect that it might have. And of course, fire effects on aircraft are always immediately posing a high risk. So the only thing we can really look at on an in-depth level is take a look at the chance of things happening. And if we want to know what the chances of things going wrong, we need to know what we take on board. We need to make sure that we get a grip on the processes. How do we know? How is this checked? How is it enforced? How do we communicate it? But also, how do we regulate this together? UPU, again, together with ICAO, and from an operational perspective, the security domain together with the safety domain. I think this is the way to go. I believe this was my last. Yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for inviting me to get this message across. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed. Checking if there is any question from the floor. Yes, I see Jan Bożnanski has raised his hand. Jan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ed, for your excellent presentation. I think that we will discuss also in other presentation about some issues you raised. At this moment, I'd like just to point out two issues or two comments. When you were talking that mail and cargo cannot be interchanged, we fully agree and we support this idea. If something is sent as a cargo, cannot be handed over in the country of destination as a mail or opposite. It's absolutely not possible. It's not legal. And as maybe many of participants of this workshop knows, we discussed that issue in the IATA UPU contact committee, and last week or 2 weeks ago, we agreed that we will create or reopen again expert team focused on these hybrid scenarios to assess them from legal point of view, from operational point of view, and give some kind of guidance to carriers to know which scenario is legal, which scenario is supported, or which scenario is absolutely not acceptable for us. This is the first comment. The second comment is related to the questions you raised, how airline get the result of a risk assessment, how it could be checked, and so on and so on. We will present very soon some part of the discussion. Bernard and Wijnand will present work on the protocol for late referrals, not for a risk assessment before handover to the carrier, but the post really took seriously this issue, and to be sure that the designated operators are really providing risk assessment in line with all requirements to meet ICS2 requirements. For example, we already implemented, we call it EAD check tool. It means some kind of IT tool which will check before handover to the carrier whether for all items containing good the item message or data, electronically data, customs data were sent to the country of destination, whether for the data we received any kind of request for information, request for screening, or do not load before we are closing the consignment. This will be checked a few times with the system, and then we will assign, we call it applicable regulation flag or information into the carded message for carrier that the risk assessment was made fully in line with these ICS2 requirements. So this is a way how we would like to inform carriers about risk assessment status or results. And to answer your question, how it could be checked, theoretically we can offer, and it's also another IT tool which is offered by Postal Technology Center of UPU. This EAD check tool could be used through API also by carriers or by customs. So we can work on this tool, we can prepare it, we can test it, but this is maybe one of the possible way forward how to share this data with carriers. Thank you.
If I may do a quick response on that, Andre. Thank you very much on this. First of all, on your kind words of the presentation, of course, but also on your enlightenment of the two topics. And really thank you for support on the issues of hybrid situations, because I fully support what you say about it. And that is something we should get rid of as soon as we can. And lastly, your comments on basically offering the relaying of the referrals back to the operator, that would certainly be a good idea as well. But this is particularly why I asked Arnoud Wink to join me, and what is the basically the core business of Arnoud and Bernard Heuseveld in my organization. Again, thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I see, and we will just take one more comment because I'm looking at the time. I don't want to impair any other presentation. We have Wijnand Alberts on the call as well. He's going to be a presenter for the next session, but I think he's got a question also or a comment to make. Please, Wijnand, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Andre, and Ed, for your very good presentation. Also, Ian Knowles of ICAO. So my question is, or maybe it's more a remark. When I listen to the presentation, Ed, I think that most of the presentation, also the examples you show, are driven by safety and not by security. I of course do understand that from an operator and airline point of view. But when we look, for example, to the ICS requirements, these are more security driven. So my question is, in the discussions, we should separate the safety and security aspects, because also UPU is doing a very good job in creating all kinds of safety-related measures, checks, those trainings worldwide, etc., etc. Many posts have installed screening for postal items. So it is, of course, there are related topics, but we should not, how to say it, mix them, commingle them in the discussions. So that's what I would like to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wijnand. Oh, sorry, Ed, you want to reply?
Well, just a very short response. Thank you, Wijnand, for that. Yeah, I understand, and I know this is the discussion already for the past few years when we are trying to discuss safety and security together. I understand your comment on the ICS security, but to me that is based on profiling. And what we see, and I did not I specifically mentioned the results of the investigations the Royal Mail did, or even does perhaps, on incoming mail, despite training, despite regulations, despite everything we have in place, we still find things that are not right in the industry. And our point of view, at least for the time being, is that while we are screening for security anyway, we know we can use parts of that for safety. And if we can, we should not, don't do it. So Andre, thanks again. And I'm also happy to take any comments in a later stage or via email.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. And if there are additional questions, do not hesitate. You have a chat that you can use, and post your questions. We will gather all these questions, and I promise I'll get back to you, and we will also publish the answers at the same time we publish the recording of the webinar. So thank you again, Ed. Thank you all for your comments. As a matter of fact, this discussion was an excellent transition, let's say, to the next session that we have here. And allow me, Ed, to use your last little bullet point here. How do we regulate it together? I think this is extremely important here. We do have regulators, that's absolutely true. And then we have the users of that regulation. In this case, we have postal operators and airlines. And our feedback can also help the regulators to fine-tune a little bit the legislation that they have in place. So it is extremely important that we continue the dialogue all together. Security and safety is intricated. Yes, there are some similarities, but there are different regulations. How can we align best in order to, let's say, minimize the resources and the costs and make sure that our safety is enhanced? When it comes to security, we are working very, very well together, and with the upcoming requirements for the EU ICS 2 Release 2 implementation in March 2023, our next session is going to show what the IATA and the UPU have worked on for the last years, and I can't even remember how many years we've been working on that, quite a long time already. And it is really urgent that we all continue to work together and get to a consensus on how this is going to be implemented. So for the next presentation, I would like to give the floor to Wijnand Alberts from Post NL, and also to Bernard Heutzfeld from KLM, and they're going to drive us through the latest progress on this topic. So Bernard and Wijnand, I'll give you the floor, and you decide who wants to start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andre. I think Bernard and I, we talked about how to do the presentation, and we agreed that I will do the first half, which is more post-oriented, and Bernard will do the second half, which is more airline-oriented. So I would like to welcome you all. My name is Wijnand Albers. I'm Senior Consultant International Regulations in PostNL. Bernard will introduce himself when he starts his part of the presentation. And we would like to guide you through the electronic advanced data activities within the UPU IATA contact committee, where we are working in an expert team which tries to address all EAD related subjects and also to find solutions and to come with proposals for procedures and processes. We did already a first presentation in the September webinar, which was organized. And then via this presentation, we want to give you an update on the process, the progress, sorry, on the where we are now and what will be the next steps. Next slide, please. So the content of the presentation, first of all, some background and introduction. Then the basics for the electronic advanced data exchange, which is a global postal model. Then we would like to introduce the happy flow, and that's where the EAD and assessments are done when the item is still in the postal domain, so that the post themselves can deal with any additional actions or requests from security authorities. Then we would like to explain a little bit the referrals in general, and then, of course, and that's the most important one, what to do if referrals arrive after the handover of a postal item to the carrier. And there we think there should be a protocol in place in case of late referrals. And the abbreviation stands for referral for information, referral for screening, and do not load. Then some additional information. What is still work in progress, what to do, and last but not least, also the next steps and a call to action to all people who are interested in the subject as such. Next slide, please. So as an introduction, of course, and it was already mentioned earlier during one of the other presentations, there are at the moment several countries or regions in the world working on the introduction of new regulatory electronic advanced data requirements. And the basics of these EAD requirements, they are approved via the ICAO and WCO, World Customs Organization, in the joint WCO-ICAO guiding principles for preloading advanced cargo information. The probably well-known PLACI guidelines. Regarding countries and regions that are working on the EAD requirements, for some examples: United States via their ACAS regulations, Canada via their PSCT regulations, the European Union via the ICS2 PLACI regulations, and also the UK via the pre-departure information for cargo targeting, the PREDICT. The main focus at this moment is on the European Union because they will introduce new regulatory requirements. Sorry, my headset was disconnected. So there are new regulatory requirements which will come in place for the European Union as a destination per the 1st of March 2023. And the expectation is that once the European Union has introduced this new regulatory requirements, that also several other countries will follow soon. What we expect and think is that several countries are really looking at the European Union, what their experience will be, and once the issues have been solved there, have been implemented there, then some other countries probably will ask also for more or less comparable requirements. Next slide, please. So this is the basic model, which is the global postal model. This model shows how data flows will flow from the relevant parties in this process. In the left upper corner, you see the origin post. From there, the process starts. Once a postal item is handed over by a customer to the post, the post is asking for the details of these items via data collection. That can be a website, what we call portals, can be API connections, can be other means of data handover. It can even be that a post will do a manual data entry. But that's the data capture process. Then once these data are known via flow 1, the data will be exchanged with the destination post via the ITMAT message, EDI message called ITMAT, item attribute. Then the destination post will exchange these data to, in this case, the European Union database based on the ITMAT data they have received. The destination customs will do an assessment and will feed back to the destination post the assessment complete or a referral notification. And that message, which is in flow 3, will be forwarded by the destination post to the origin post. And that's in message 4. Then the origin post knows, okay, this item is allowed to be put on a plane. So they will start the processing and then we will follow to flow 7. Only in case there is not an assessment complete given, but a referral notification, then of course the referral needs to be acted upon. In that case, flow 4 plus will be initiated, the referral action will be done, and then again, the outcome of that will be communicated via destination post to destination customs / security authority. And again, then via flow 4 plus plus, there will be a confirmation that the referral action was okay and that the item is good to go. Then what I already said, the post will process the item. They will put it in a bag or a other kind of receptacle. In the postal communication via flow 5, they will send dispatch data to the destination post, which includes receptacle ID and also the list of items which are in that receptacle. And that's done in the pre-des message, which is in flow 5, exchange with destination post. Then the destination post will, in flow 6, communicate the receptacle IDs which will be shipped to the country of destination and the item IDs which are in these receptacles to the destination customs and security authorities, which means that at that moment the destination authorities already know which items will be forwarded to them by the sending post. Then at the moment the dispatch information is exchanged with the destination post, the origin post will also start closing the bags. They will put the bags into a consignment, and at the moment they close the consignment, then the consignment data will be exchanged with the carriers they are using via the carded message, which means that they say these and these and these bags are in this consignment and we are handing this over to you. This is in flow 7. Then the carrier can do the manifesting, saying that bags X, Y, and Z will be transported on flight A to the destination country. And that's done via the flow 8 being the manifest flow. And at that moment, because the destination authorities receive the manifest data with the bag IDs, they can match that with the data which they have already in their database about the back IDs and the items in these back IDs. So that's where they exactly know on what flight which items will arrive. This is the postal global model. What is not yet in this model included is the scenario. Are the scenarios where we have transit or transshipments. That's still under discussion. So this is for direct shipments to a destination country. Next slide, please. Here you see the happy flow. The item attributed message and data are approved in the postal domain. What you see here is that the ITMAT data normally are received by the post from their customers at the moment of handover of an item to the post. And that's often at the latest 8 hours before processing, but often it's more than a day before processing of the item at the Office of Exchange, at the sorting center where the international shipments are prepared for transportation. Then you see the steps which are in the process of the Office of Exchange. And you can see that there will be done checks on whether an ITMAT message has been sent for that specific item. Before we put it into a bag, in our software, we do these type of checks, or we will at least do these type of checks. Then we also check whether there have been received referrals. If there has been received a referral, then we will act upon it and do what is needed. Once these referrals have been solved, then we will close to the dispatch. And that's more or less 2 to 4 hours before the flight will depart. These items which are in these dispatches do not have any open referrals anymore, and we will send the previous. Then at the moment the dispatch is added to a consignment, all receptacles will have EAD approved items. We close the consignment, send the carded to the carrier, and then the carded message will include the AR flags, which means that all applicable regulations have been applied. And then, last but not least, we hand over the receptacles to the handlers of the airlines, and then we are compliant with regulations. So this is the happy flow. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, Bernard, you take over from here. Yeah.
Yep. Yes, please.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Bernard Heusveld, KLM Cargo as a product owner for security, safety, and customs. Also working very much on the ICS2, what's coming our way next year. So just taking over from Wijnand. He mentioned a couple of times the referrals. Of course, referrals is an important instrument to see if there is not everything is. Say again. That an assessment has not been going okay, so we get a referral. And for the airmail, the post is responsible as an economic operator to file the EAD to the authority. And this is based on the mail items. Firstly, as a separate mail item, and secondly, as a item as part of a receptacle. And the ICS, the import control, is done by the carrier. So to tell what flight, which bags are carried on. The referrals are responses from an authority that require attention, direct, indirect, and the speedy back and forth communication between origin, post destination, authority must exist in order to answer to the referrals. Of course, you do not want, you want all your referrals to have been answered. So for that, it is mainly currently between the origin post via the destination post to the authority, but there's not real existing UPU or IATA messaging between the DO and the carrier for the referrals. So Late referrals are referrals that are received by the origin DO after physical handover. So it's already in the carrier's possession, probably with the handling agent, the general handling agent. And then, of course, some action need to be taken. And when late, for these cases, there must be an agreed protocol. So although we do not expect, well, I should rephrase that, most of the answers from the authority will be okay. It's an automated process. They will do their checks automatically based on, but there are some cases then we can get a referral. So that's why we need to have a protocol on that. And also we need to have an exception handling process in place in order to take care of that. If you go please to the next slide. So this is taken from the EU guidance for the referral protocols. What you can see is that if there is a preloading risk analysis has been done, it can be an assessment complete, or it can be an RFI, or it could be a DNL. And based on the RFI, you have to give an answer to the risk authority, and it can come back the answer as assessment completed, do not load, or RFS. Or in case an RFS, you give the answer because the request for information. Then based on that information, you get an assessment complete or DNL, or you can get a DNL directly. The sizes of the arrows, of course, do not say anything because the assessment complete is the vast majority of all the answers that we will get from the authority. So the RFI, the RFS and DNL will be very, very limited in numbers. Although being very limited, we need to take care of them because it's always in the little things that we need to be very adamant in order for safety, for security of the aircraft. If you can go to the next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, we have an RFI, an RFS, and a do not load. For this slide is about the RFI, and a late referral is request for information, meaning that the authority wants more information. As you can see, we have a process here, but it shows that if the RFI can be resolved in a short time, I mean, it should be taken care of. And I guess a lot of times it could be that there's just a simple question that maybe a simple answer is done by the post, and then everything is all right. And then of course you have to decide for how long can it take for such an answer to give before you go to contact the carrier. So if there is no answer to be given to the post, then you have to go and find that item, and that's where the process continues here. The DO has to contact the carrier, the GHA has to locate the receptacle, and then of course you have cases it's already it has been handed over, it is already in flight, or it is under the aircraft, or it is somewhere in the warehouse. So this process, and I will not go too deep in it because maybe when you get the presentation later on, you can really focus on the different processes. But it's needed to have quite a extensive process because then everybody knows how to handle, even if those cases might be very limited. Just to show, we agreed with the IATA and the UPU that the communication goes via the carded AR flag. The status is 01 based on the fact if everything is okay. So under discussion, we still have a discussion between ourselves. As in a good marriage, you can have discussions, but we need to figure that out. The post state that the late RFI, RFS do not constitute an imminent threat and therefore should keep moving. And some carriers, we are one of them, state that a referral should not fly and an assessment complete must be received in order to guarantee the safety of item or receptacles for that matter. And that is something that we have to still have to discuss and find a way out of this. Meaning that for us, the RFI and RFS, if you have a request for screening, for instance, we come to that later, you need to do some screening, so it will not be moving. But again, said that's still under discussion how to solve this one. So this is on the late referrals for the RFI. If you go to the next slide, please.
You see that we have here a late referral for the RFS. RFI is about the information, RFS is about screening. So the destination authority requires screening. And you have to do that. I mean, for the screening, you need the item or the receptacle in which the item is. So you need to go and find that receptacle in order to do. And also there you have to ask the cases, is it after handover? Is it after takeoff? Is it before takeoff? Where is it? Where do we need to find it? And at some, it might change from station to station, how the protocols are exactly in the nitty-gritty. But basically, this would be the approach. And of course, having screened it, as you saw a couple of slides earlier, if you respond with the screening information, you would accept an assessment complete in order to have that answer so that everything is okay. And looking at the processes like this, if the item is in a receptacle, which is in a container with a lot of other mail bags, and it is already underway to the aircraft or is under the aircraft, that means that it requires a different attention, and maybe you have to take the whole container back in order to do the screening. So it will very much disrupt the process, and that's why obviously we want this not happen at all, but we need the process for this because it could happen. If you go to the next slide, please. That is the do not load. The do not load is of course serious business. It means that the destination authority found something threatening. That means that it needs immediate attention, and not only of the handler or the carrier, it also from the post, but also from the local authorities. And of course, it depends on how each local authority sets their rules and how everything is discussed between the local authorities, the ground handler. Action needs to be taken. But late referrals, like a DNL, is late referral, is extremely dangerous and will absolutely disrupt. And we can only hope that it will not happen that often. Based on my experience with air cargo, it hardly ever happens, but you need a process for it. And we can only pray that it will hardly ever happen or actually not happen at all. If you then go to the next slide, then I give the word back to Wijnand again.
Yes, thank you. So we are still working on this, and you can also imagine elaborating on the words of Bernard regarding RFI and RFS. What we experience at this moment with the European Union, that, for example, when they have RFIs, so requests for information, then it's almost always not about the exact content of the items, but it's more customs related information they want to have. Some regarding HS codes or the value of the item, these type of things. But we need to discuss these different scenarios still, how to deal with it, and what it means in case the items have already been handed over to an airline. What we are working on at this moment in the IATA UPU expert team on the AED is that we will supplement the protocols with a clear statement on the existing regulations, also the responsibilities and the technical requirements for compliance. And what we mean with these is that for example, the ICAO WCO principles need to be known. What regarding the security related measures. So we really want to have as much as possible all necessary framework or framework issues covered in the statement which is related to this EAD requirement. We will include also information to the documentation regarding the protocols, which is an example of the relevant WCO ICAO principles. Also very important terminology and definition of words used. For example, what is in cargo world called a piece is or an item is in the postal world called a receptacle, which is a bag. When we are talking in the postal world about an item, then we are talking about the individual package which was handed over by a customer to us. And there are several ones of them in one bag. So that's to avoid confusion and misunderstanding. We need to have this list of terminology and definitions also made available to everybody who needs to work on these subjects. Then, of course, a global postal model and also a framework of a do not load protocol, and maybe even some other documents which we will include in the full set of documentation. Next slide, please. Last but not least, the way forward. As mentioned, the presented procedures, these can be used as the draft framework, and especially pointing at the procedures which you saw on the slides of Bernard. They are very detailed. They are based on cargo procedures, so they can be used as a draft framework, but they also need to be tailored and fine-tuned locally between the airline itself, their handler locally, and the local post, because every specific situation on every airport is different compared to another. So the fine-tuning is really essential, that the protocols are fine-tuned based on the local situation of that specific post and airline. Already mentioned, some aspects are still under discussion. We are aiming to have all these aspects clarified around summertime, but of course this is also depending on input from discussions between UPU and the European Union. Then I'm especially pointing at, for example, the transit and transshipment discussions. But what we expect is, and hope is, that around summertime we will have some more guidance on these ones, so that we can at least include transit and transshipments also in the documentation. And we see it also as a kind of living documentation, because every time again there will be questions regarding this, these protocols and how to improve them. Once we have an update on all the work that has been done, once we have the full set of, sorry, my phone is ringing. Once we have the full set of information available, we will communicate this via the regular channels of UPU and IATA, and also if there are updates, we will communicate these via the same channels. But, and that's very important, what is also very important is that both posts and carriers need to start as soon as possible to at least prepare themselves, to plan to start the work, because we have mentioned summertime, but when we are around summertime, then we have only 6-7 months to go before the implementation in the European Union. And during summertime, many people are on holidays. So actually there will be 5 or 6 months to do the work and to develop what is needed, both in operational terms, but also in the way of IT. So you need already to start now preparing and plan the work and develop a localized version of the general protocol, of course, based on the local situation and the current available information. We will, of course, include this call to action in the final version of the protocols, which we will share as soon they are ready to be communicated. And last but not least, don't forget that these localized protocols, which need to be developed by the post and the airlines, but they also need to be authorized by the local security authority, because this is a triangular protocol, and especially the do not load protocol. And that authorization is key to achieving compliance with the security levels as required by the EAD and enforcing countries. So this is, I think, my last remark, our last remark. Yes, thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, Bernard and I will try to reply to them.
Thank you, Wijnand, and thank you, Bernard. not only for the presentation, but I would also like to thank you for taking the lead in the post-airline post environment, let's say, at the IATA UPU contact committee. We need this process, these guidelines to be laid out urgently, because as you mentioned, the 1st of March 2023, we have a regulation that is coming into play, and we have to make sure that we can inform our industry accordingly. So for all those that are on the call, definitely do not hesitate to ask questions. Unfortunately, because looking at the time that we have, we are running a bit late. I think we will have to skip the Q&As now, but please do not hesitate to put them in the chat, or just send it to me directly, send it to Jan from UPU directly, or even to Wynand and Bernard directly, and we will make sure to answer each and every question. And also we will keep you, of course, up to date regarding the progress of the business processes that we are drafting right now. So thank you again, Wynand, and thank you, Bernard. We were mentioning at the beginning of this presentation that in the global postal model, we will get, as an airline, we will get the messages from a postal operator, and we will have to use information from that message in order to populate a manifest together with an XFWB and an XFHL, which are the consignment level information and house level information. This is how it works on our side. Unfortunately, we are using two different systems. There is a mail system on one side using Edifact, and on the other side we have a cargo system using IMP or XML at the best. These messages are not compatible, therefore we need to create a translator. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Stefan Hermann from UPU and also Luc Lariossan from lectu.com. They are both going to present on that solution, and let me just find your presentation and I'll give you the floor right away. So Stefan and Luc, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, André. So I will start the presentation and then give the floor to Luc. So my name is Stefan Hermann. So I'm in charge of the product management of the mail solutions, the software solutions developed by the UPU. So I will present here some solution we have developed or we are developing. So on the next slides, please. So I will start with the EAD check. So this is something that was mentioned by Jan earlier in the presentation. So on the next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So the EAD check, so it's a functionality that allows designated operators, and carriers, and could be actually also the customs if needed, as mentioned by Jan. So to check that the mail they're processing, in fact, complies with the EAD requirements at destination. So we have developed this solution. So it's a standard solution, so that we have implemented in our mail solutions for the post, but this is something that is available as an API for any other entity not using UPU solutions. It's quite generic. In the next slide, I will show you the details. No, sorry, can you stay? Sorry. Thanks. I will give you more details on what the solution is. But just few words on the planning of development and the deployment. So this API is, in fact, it's available since November 2021. We have implemented it in our IPS. So IPS is the main solution used by the post for the management of mail. And that's the tool some posts use. So we have 112 users. So that's the tool used to generate the carded messages. So we have implemented this EAD check so in November 2021 in IPS. It's also available from the same date. It's available for all the other posts and carriers as an API. So all the posts using other systems and even the carriers. And next weekend we are planning to upgrade IPS.post. So IPS.post is the hosted version. It's the web version, let's say, of the IPS product. So we have 81 users for IPS.post. So it means that from next week we should have around 81 operators able to use the AD check solution functionality. So on the next slide, please. More information on the details. So EAD check, in fact, so when a mail item is scanned, so we scan the S10. So when a post scans the S10, so we make a query. It can be to the CDS. Our CDS is another solution developed by the UPU for the post, for the management of the customs declarations and all messages associated to the customs declarations. So, and QCS Big Data is our central database where we store all the EDI messages exchanged between post and carriers, between post and customs. So so when the mail item is scanned, so we send the S10, so the barcode, so the item ID, and the response is so associated to the S10 is whether or not an ITMAT was sent for that mail item. The list of referrals, so if it's a request for information, request for screening, or even a do not load, and in case of request for information or request for screening, is there a response for that referral? So this is what currently we return. And this will help, this will assist the post to know whether or not the item is can be sent. Assessment complete is not yet implemented because assessment complete is exchanged more in test at the moment. It's not widely used, but it's coming now in 2022, especially from EU. At the moment, they send assessment complete only to few destinations, but they will send it to all destinations. So we are implementing also the support of the assessment complete. So in the list of referrals, we'll have, in addition to the request for information, screening, and do not load, also the assessment complete in case if it's there or not. So on the next slide, this is where this EAD check functionality can be used in the supply chain. So it can be outbound mail. So at item level, at the office of exchange. So when a mail arrives at the office of exchange or before leaving the office of exchange. So item level, it's when the mail arrives at the office of exchange. Receptacle level, yeah, I forgot to mention that it works also when you scan the S9, the receptacle level, but I will come back to that. So when we use the EAD check when posts are preparing the dispatches, and we can do a last check at the consignment closure. So just before closing the consignment and sending the carded message, we can have a last check. And in case, I will show you that later, but in case there's something wrong, then we can keep the consignment open and not close it. And this can be used in case of late referral, for instance. Yeah, something can arrive late. Handover of receptacle from post, that's where the AD check functionality can be used by the carriers. They can also do the same. So when they receive receptacles, they can also scan. They don't scan the mail items, but they scan the bag labels. And in fact, what we do is that we do the reconciliation. So when we receive the request with the receptacle ID, in our database, we check the content of that receptacle for all items, and for each item, we can have a status, if it's green or red, depending on the messages exchanged or received. We can use the same at open and close transit post, so they can do exactly the same. So they receive mail items in open transit, so they can scan all of them and have the assessment. Or close transit, same thing. They receive bags, receptacles in close transit, so they post can scan the bag labels and then get the status for each item within the bag. This could work in transshipment as well by the carriers, so same thing, by scanning the receptacle IDs, and it could also be used for inbound receptacles and mail items. So what is important is that we provide the status of individual mail items, not at receptacle level. It's always at mail item level. And the status, second point that is very important, the status does not include, is not included into any EDI message. It's just a flag that we display on the screen or that we can provide through the API. And the status does not contain any personal information, any personal data. We do not send part of the EDI messages. It's just an information. So that's also something important because it's based on some messages like ITMA that contains personal information, and we do not provide any of this. Just is there an ITMA? Yes or no? That's it. So on the next, so that was for the AD check API. So can be used by any, as I said, any post, any carrier. Now the AR flag. So you talked about the AR flag, and now I'm going to show you how we have implemented that and how we use the EAD check. The way we have implemented the AR flag in our solutions, again, IPS, IPS.post, IPS cloud, is at the consignment closure. So we scan the receptacles to be part of a consignment. And every time we scan the receptacle to be included in consignment, so we have a last EAD check. Here again, based on the bag label. So we check the content of each bag or if each receptacle, and we display either it's green, there's no alert, we have ITMAT, no do not load, everything is okay. Then we can close the consignment, and in the card can be sent with the AR flag set to 1. In case we have an alert, so in case, let's say we have an item that does not have ITMAT, or we have a do not load, or anything else, or we have a request for information or screening, but no response to that. So in that case, the post has to take an action. Either they take an action, so they remove the mail item from the receptacle, or they respond. So they send a response to the request for information or request for screening, but they have to do something. Otherwise, they do not close the consignment. Or they could maybe confirm in case we have a receptacle containing only documents. In that case, even if they are barcodes, it's normal for documents. There's no ITMAT. We have ITMAT only for goods. So, but in all cases, they have to do something. They have to confirm, to take an action or to confirm, and then they can close the consignment and send the cardit with the AR flag set to 1. So this is important, and this is the way we have implemented. We have implemented this in our systems, and this is, as I said, how they will use that for the IPS.post users from next week. This will be in place. For the IPS users, it depends because they need to upgrade when they're coming from old versions. On the next slide, thanks. Now, something that was mentioned before, so that's the converter. So that's the tool that we have developed for the airlines. So on the next slide, please. Yes, thanks. So we have developed for the airlines so a converter. So Andre mentioned, yeah, the fact that there are different systems and we need some translations between two systems. And this then to assist and to help also the airlines. So some airlines have solutions already. They have solutions for the conversion, or they can use third-party system for the conversion. But we also provide the same type of solution for the airlines. So how it works is that we have an exchange of cardit and resdit between post and airlines. What we need, what is mandatory, is the postal airway bill. So this is the mandatory information we need. So it could be either in the cardit, but in most of the cases, the postal airway bill will be in the RESDIT message from the airline to the post. So as soon as we have the postal airway bill, either in the cardit or in the RESDIT, so we do the conversion. So we take the information, we do the conversion, and we make the files available. So again, through an API for the airline. Airlines then can just retrieve the messages in the system. So this is in theory how it works. We have started a pilot, and now give the floor to Luc, who was also in charge of this pilot for airlines. And the next slide, please. Thanks. Luc.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon or good morning to everybody, depending on where you are on the planet. My name is Luc Larieux-Sens, and I am the founder and the managing director of Leg2.com. Leg2.com is a private consultancy company specialized in mail transportation. We help the postal industry and the air cargo industry stakeholders to improve and enhance their processes during the mail conveyance process. This is our main duty. We are a young company. We have been implemented 2 years ago only, and we have already assisted 3 postal operators, 7 different airlines, 3 GSSA, and even 2 surface carriers to implement some EDI and operational procedures. Very recently, we had the opportunity to assist 1 airline and 1 IT supplier. The name of this IT supplier is Airmail Data. We had the opportunity to assist the IT supplier and 1 airline to perform a live test with the UPU XML conversion tool. So I'm here this afternoon to share with you the result of this first testing, and to share with you our experience that we have learned from this first testing. I have retained 4 main ideas. The first one is related to the AR flag identification. As Stefan already said, and I saw that Jan also put a comment in the thread, for the moment, the postal operator will be able to send the AR flag if they are using the IPS software as from next week, I think. So for the moment, we have no AR flag in the cardit so far, but in order to be ready for this webinar, we have built up a cardit with an AR flag, such as if it was in real condition. Our first comment would be to say, okay, it's really easy to identify the presence or not of an AR flag, but we would have a comment on this, and maybe it's a good thing. This is something to maybe to report, André and Jan, to the IATA UPU contact committee. I trust you on this. Be careful. The AR flag is really easy to identify. But apart from the status, which is 0 or 1, you have also a free text of 70 characters, which can be populated by the postal operator. Today, when we speak about EAD, we are mainly speaking about the ICS2 for the European Union. But as another participant said earlier, other regions in the world will certainly implement EAD. And definitely, it will be important, certainly in the future, for the postal operators to clearly specify which regulation they are applying when they put the AR flag in the cardit. But you can imagine that as long as this data element is a free text, everybody can say anything. So if I have a suggestion to make, yes, try to think about standardize this free text information. Maybe it can be useful later. This is our first comment regarding the AR flag in the cardit. The second comment is relating to the alert, because if an AR flag is missing to a PLACI destination, then the airline is not supposed to carry the mail. And all the airlines will strictly refuse to carry the mail if they don't have the proof of the AR flag into the carded. So what to do from a technical and IT point of view if the AR flag is missing to a Place destination? From a technical point of view, it is quite easy to trigger an alert, both to the postal operator or to the airline. But as there is no standard on this, this kind of alert is shall be done, in an alternative way, such as an email. So what could be the reaction of an airline if an AR flag is missing? Is a RESDIT 82 a good solution or not? The discussion is open, so we leave it to you. But definitely, we think that from this first experience, we really think that the alert procedure shall be on the table at a certain point. The third element also that we want to share with the attendee of this webinar is related to the conversion of the carded into postal airway bill. It has been said earlier, but by Mr. Boone, it is very important for the airline to clearly identify the shipper. And according to our experience, the only way to clearly identify a shipper when you convert a carded into a postal airway bill is to make one postal airway bill for one carded. And of course, one house airway bill at the receptacle level, one house airway bill per receptacle. But we have seen many airlines, especially in the operations department, requesting to aggregate several CN38, several carded into the same airway bill. From an operational point of view, I understand it's much more handy, but you can't really identify the shipper if you are proceeding like this. So maybe if we can suggest something, there is a little bit of awareness, to spread into the airline community about this, because I perfectly understand from a process point of view that it is not really handy to have one CN for one postal airway bill. But yeah, definitely, at this stage, I don't see how we can we can identify correctly a shipper if we aggregate several CN38 in the same master airway bill. So this is also something to consider, maybe to raise the awareness of the operational people in the airline, because many of them are really pushing to have only one airway bill for whatever CNs. And at last, the fourth comment we would like to make this afternoon after this first testing is to report a satisfactory usage of the UPU XML conversion tool. As Stefan said, it is not mandatory to use this tool because many airlines can already convert themselves from cargo imp message to XML and to forward to the border authorities some XML messages. But if the airline is not equipped, definitely we have used the tool of the UPU in a very satisfactory way. It is, really handy and easy. And certainly our last duty on this, we want to check deeper just to be sure that there is a correct mapping of the data between the original FWB, which has been issued during the postal airway bill issuance, and the XML conversion. We think it could be benefit for a lot of people if we check this. So it will be our duty during the next coming weeks to make this mapping between cargo IMP standard message and XML message, just to be sure that everything is perfectly aligned. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Jan and André, for giving me the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Lux. Thank you, Stefan. As usual, very good to have you on on a call, on a meeting, or in this case on the webinar. And thank you for the results of these pilots. It's important that we test those solutions. And I saw on one of the slides from Stefan that if any airline is interested, of course, in doing the pilots, they should reach out to you, and they can test, obviously, the solution should they be willing to test. I'm again a bit concerned about the time, so if there is any particular question from any of the participants in this webinar, we will take all these questions and we will submit them to you after the webinar, and we will publish the answers together with the recording of this webinar. So thank you again, Stefan. Thank you again, Luc. And I will quickly go to the last session that we have here. We will have maybe to shorten it a bit, and if the participants can stay a bit longer, then of course please do, because we will maybe extend a little bit over the time that we've allocated for that. But for the next session related to the e-commerce challenge, I would like to give the floor to Mette Boysen from PostNord. She is going to discuss a project, let's say, or pilots that we do at the IATA UPU on paper-free transports, and these are ongoing pilots. So again, anything who would like to join those paper-free transports pilots is absolutely welcome. Mette, thank you very much for being here on such a short notice, and sorry for being a bit late. I know that you are extremely in a rush, so I'm just going to keep quiet now, and I'll let you talk. Thank you, Mette.
I've got that on recording that you're going to be quiet. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. As Andre mentioned, my name is Mette Boysen, and I am International Process Manager for PostNord, the designated operator in Denmark and Sweden. And I have the pleasure to talk to you about paper-free transport, something we have been working on during the last years, I would say, first in an IPC initiative and then in UPU. Next slide, please, Andre. The whole background for paper-free transports is, of course, the EDI messages. The number of them have increased, and so has also the quality. And it has now come to a time where we can use them to not just EAD issues and things like that, but also some more fun things, I would say. And all of us on both sides want to improve our common processes. Paper-free transport is therefore one of these topics we are working on. And we, as I mentioned before, started it as an activity within Engage, but now it has become a global activity. At the latest meeting in the UPU Transport Group, and actually also in the UPU IATA Contact Committee, I presented an updated guideline for creating paper-free transport, and it was approved by both groups. So that was fantastic. Next slide, Andre. Quickly going through the guideline, it includes background information. Why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve? It includes preconditions for the paper-free transports. And just to put a few words on that, it is, of course, the EDI. We need to have the most recent messages, versions of the carded resting message. We must exchange pre-con and rest-con between the posts. And there has to be a tripartite agreement between origin post, destination post, and the carrier in place. Minimum requirements. We can, of course, all ask for all the rest of messages available. Realistically, we won't get them. Minimum requirements is we need to know that the mail has been delivered. We need to know that we have sent it to the carrier. So we need to have the carded, and we need to have a pre-con, and the destination post needs to send a rest-con. That is the really minimum. Everything else just gives bonus there. Scope of implementation. This is, of course, a part of the tripartite agreement that's made, but it is what products are we including, which lanes are we talking about, things like that. We are not here looking about invoicing, settlement, things like that. This is just related to the transport. Preparation and communication. Everything works well if it's been prepared properly and communicated to the right persons. It goes for this also here. Then we have the paper-free operational and messaging procedures. It describes the procedures in detail. For example, carding needs to be transmitted before the mail is handed over to the carrier. Seems simple, but it's not always that in reality. As part of the guidelines, you will find a checklist for implementing paper-free transports. There will be a template for the tripartite agreement, and there's a description of the available tools. And for that, I would say it's not just the IPC tools or the UPU, but both. Next slide, Andre. I hope this one is readable because it is a bit small. Everything starts with someone wishing to be paper-free. Then they contact the partners and say, should we agree on being paper-free? If they say no, everything stops quickly. If they say yes, they can move on, look at the checklist. Is it okay to everything in the checklist? Fine. Or there might be a need for some corrective actions. Once everything on the checklist is good, they can prepare the tripartite agreement. Following that, it would be a good idea to consider, is it necessary to have a pilot? I would say if it's with a partner that hasn't worked with paper-free transports before, it would be a very good idea to have a pilot. On the other hand, if you have a carrier and both destination post and origin post that has been doing this before, they know what they're up to, they know what they have to do, then it might not be a need. Anyway, you can arrange the pilots, carry them through, and if the pilots are successful, then you can say, this was good, I want to continue, and you want to be paper-free. Or if it wasn't good, you can say, do I really want to continue? Then maybe do some corrective actions or stop the whole process. So this is the process in overall mentioned. At the last meeting in IATA UPU Contact Committee, we of course discussed how we're going to find out who is which post and which carriers are ready for paper-free transports, which are not, which are interested. And at that point, we decided to create a database with contacts to post and carriers. I know that this is something that's going to be worked on over some. It's not something that will be made overnight, but it's on the to-do list, let's put it that way. If you would like further information regarding the paper-free transport, you are most welcome to contact Jan Bonansky or Hector Martinarias from IPC. That was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mette. Indeed, looking at the flow chart, it looks like an easy process, a few checkbox to yes, no. And therefore, I encourage everyone on this webinar, should you be interested in becoming a paper-free to really contact UPU or IPC. You can do a few pilots, and as it was mentioned in the flow, should you not be satisfied with the pilots, then obviously you can go back to paper, but we strongly encourage you to consider going digital. Okay, so paper-free is of course an essential component of e-commerce as a whole, but definitely also a sustainable move that would be certainly appreciated not only by your organization but also by your business partners and by your customers. So if
maybe Andre,
yeah, sure.
just one quick comment. My production guys keep on asking me, when have you implemented it for all destinations? Because they really appreciate the fact that they don't need to print all the papers all the time, having to discuss with the ground handlers that they have to take the mail and not just the mail, but also the papers and things like that. They say it has made everything much more simple for them. So from Post North side, we are ready to go paper-free as quick as possible.
Thanks, Mette. And indeed, so everyone is encouraged to join you. I see, Jan, you've raised your hand, but you have a black screen. Maybe you can switch on your camera.
Is it better?
Nope.
Now?
Yes.
Okay, so I just like to make a short comment to the request from Mette's colleague. Yes, the UPU International Bureau will do our best, of course, to make it to be used by as many designated operators as possible, but we cannot make it mandatory because for that process, and it's clearly written also in the guideline, there are some prerequisites to be met, needed to be met. So we need to speak, all the designated operators need to speak also to their customs. Without their support, this paper-free transport is not possible, but there is a good progress, and still more and more customs are also EDI oriented or EAD oriented, and they prefer communicate through EDI messages instead of paper. So we will do our best. We will create a list of all designated operators and carriers which are ready for piloting, and we will support anybody for piloting this very useful activity, which will help us to show designated operators that it's not only necessary to meet EAD requirements, but to use also this data for simplifying the processes like paper-free transport, paper-free customs, paper-free accounting, and other processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And sorry about the screen. The mouse went over the weather, actually. Sorry for that. So yes, please, again, really call to action, I guess, for all the participants here. If you are not already fully digitized, it's really important that you consider it. And this paper-free working group or pilot team is really essential for you to go in that direction. So I know that we are now a little bit over time. For those that can still manage to stay, thank you very much. I would understand if some of you need to leave because of other priorities, but I will still continue. We will finish this webinar with the two last topics. And for that, I would like to continue now. I cannot see my presentation anymore, so I'm just going back to this very briefly. Sorry about that. So going into the e-commerce challenge once again, I think there is a need to understand, obviously, the animal, let's say, that is e-commerce. It is difficult to identify in our flows. That's true, unless you really know the shipper, the customer that is sending the item. Then you can certainly identify e-commerce, but it is very difficult for an airline and even for a postal operator to identify e-commerce in the entire traffic, in the entire volumes. The only thing that we know is that e-commerce is not new anymore. We were calling that a trend. I think it's not a trend anymore. It's something that is here to stay, and it's growing really at a huge pace. So I just wanted to give you a few numbers and show you again the size of e-commerce. Here you have some numbers from 2019 about revenues generated from the e-commerce sales. You see that 2019, it is not very different today. China and the US were the two main markets. And they still continue to be, but that was actually before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, the consumer behavior has changed. We have seen that because we were locked at home, because we had to live our lives online, that more and more consumers have actually bought online, not only clothes or toys or any other consumer goods, but also food and PPEs and medicines and things like that. So, I mean, there has been a huge boom in the online sales, and there were some consumers that were not going online that started to go online. I'm thinking about older persons that were not really used to the technologies compared to the Gen Z generation and so on. All of them have found it extremely useful, and they are still using it today. Though the market has reopened, though the shops have also reopened, they still continue to buy online. So we see that it's a trend that is here to stay. You can see from here some projections. We reached $5 trillion e-commerce in 2021. The trend is really moving on fast, and the red line that you can see in between is the percentage of total retail sales globally. In 2021, we reach approximately 18% of online retail sales. That means that, let's say, 1 out of 5 items is bought online in average. We see here some e-commerce volume growth in 2021. So you see that every region in the world has really benefited from the pandemic when we talk about e-commerce. And though China and the US were the main markets, where we see also that South America and the Middle East and Africa have really, let's say, they capitalized on e-commerce, and they took the opportunity to develop quite fast. And the volume growth is quite staggering, actually, in those regions. Forecasts are forecasts, okay? In 2017, you can see in 2014, you can see the gray line. That was the forecast that was foreseen in 2014, and actually the blue line is the actual. Of course, we can only forecast after 2021. 2022 is still ongoing, but we can see that we have always been wrong. That means that e-commerce is growing way faster than we always forecast. So whatever we project now may be even wrong next year. So we have to monitor that quite closely. 2.05 billion people shopping in 2020, 2.14 in 2021. The pandemic COVID-19 has changed, let's say, the way people are buying online. And we can see that there are quite a few things that have seen a huge growth. I'm looking at the second item here on the screen, the bread machines. So people were doing their own bread at home. Toilet paper as well, plus 190%. So obviously you had to have your stocks at home. If you all remember the fights in the supermarkets for toilet papers. McKinsey and Company has also seen in the US at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, 10 years growth in 3 months. So that means that everyone was just really rushing online to get things, to get grocery stores, to get any kind of item that you would require at home. And this is actually what I call solidifying the trend that we've seen even before the pandemic, and that you can see on the right-hand side, is that we do have now calendars of e-commerce events. So in January, February, March, June, and so on, you will have loads of events that will generate online revenues. Okay, people are rushing online, they get discounts, and so on and so on. One of the most famous one is maybe the 11/11, the Double 11 Singles Day in China, which is the event that is generating the most revenues from all the events. Well, as it was so successful, obviously many people have replicated. You have a Double 12, a Double 10, a Double 9, and soon you will have Double 8, Double 7, Double 6, and so on. So you can see that everyone is really capitalizing and taking opportunities to make revenues by going e-commerce. That also can be seen by the online penetration of retail sales, 27.6% growth worldwide again. And you can see in China, I'm just going to use this example. In China, more than 1 item out of 2 is bought online, 52.1% online retail sales. So, well, obviously, it's a huge opportunity for e-shops and e-marketplaces. And when you know that the forecasts have been far more exceeded than what they have planned, you can see that the world is many years ahead of all the predictions. Number from the giants, maybe you've also followed that like me. Alibaba 84 billions, JD 48 billions at the last singles day. So it's a revenue generating, that's true. But if you look now at the arrow here in the middle, this has generated in 1 week 2.3 billion packages. They needed 500,000 trucks, 4,000 planes in order to be able to deliver to the other side of the world. So not only domestic, but also international. So that means that there is a huge logistics component behind that, and we have to make sure that we can also deliver, right? So we are the postal members, we are the airline members, and we have to make sure that we will be able to deliver. Knowing that 80% of cross-border B2C e-commerce is flown by air, 20% is trucked or by train or by a boat, well, we have an obligation, I would say, to make sure that we are relevant for the e-commerce industry, and that we also are, let's say, aligned to their desire to be able to deliver within a few days on the other side of the world, and also generate some added value like track and trace, for example, which every consumer wants. Now, at IATA, what we did is we have investigated the top 50 e-commerce companies in the world, and we looked at them to identify what their logistics model was all about. So we identified 4 models. We have a first one that is called owned and fully dedicated air transport capabilities. You will see them on the graph below on the left-hand side. These are the Amazons and Alibaba. So that means that they have air capabilities, dedicated aircrafts. They have their own infrastructure that they own and that they manage. Then you have the air freight shippers, which is e-marketplaces and e-shops who are using, let's say, the cargo channels in order to get things delivered to the end consumer. You have on the right-hand side the air parcel shippers that would be more on the courier and mail side. And then you have a hybrid model, which is a little bit in between. So some companies that will use both models. So this is evolving quite quickly. If you see on the middle of the screen, between air freight shippers and hybrid models, you have JD.com. Well, JD.com just invested in planes, and they are now way more to the far left because they do have now owned air capabilities. So it's interesting to see, let's say, the landscape of all these e-commerce marketplaces and shops because their strategies are sometimes a little bit different. So we've looked also with a consulting partner at developing some strategies for airlines. We have also strategies for e-tailers, but I will not present them here today. But we have these strategies for airlines in order to capitalize on e-commerce and make sure that they are relevant for the e-commerce partners. On the left-hand side, we had identified some pain points, and then in the middle, you can see the 5 strategies: focus on e-commerce products and services, digitize to increase speed, build into own systems, shift to cargo, and then compete through responsiveness and VAS, value-added services. So we've been talking about digitization, well, I guess since the second session. We are talking EDI, we are talking messaging, we are talking paper-free. It is extremely important if you want to be relevant in an e-commerce environment. And then the second one is also extremely important. The third one, sorry, is important here: build into own system. Integration at some point is extremely important. Sharing data, sharing real life data that the end customer or the end company can use in order to adapt and to, let's say, adapt to deviations. If there is anything happening to the shipment, that they can very quickly react. So build into own system is something that I would like to go a bit more into detail in a second when I will give the floor to my colleague, Henk Mulder, because the integration should not only happen on the operational side, but it has to happen also digitally. We've been talking about that in mapping system between mail and cargo. Well, there's certainly even more than we can do. So we need to transform. We need absolutely to be relevant. For that, everyone needs to make an own assessment of their capabilities. And with that, I recommend that you look into our website, on the IATA website under e-commerce and logistics. We have quite a few interesting e-commerce monitors that will give you the status of the e-commerce industry and some very focused topics, for example, on sustainability. And we have also articles that I would recommend you read. And if you have obviously any question or you need any additional information, I would be more than happy to reply. And I'll finish before handing over to my colleague with the statement here on the left. I think that really before the pandemic, e-commerce was key to air cargo. It was really something that was growing within the air cargo environment, and that was creating a lot of revenue. But honestly, since the pandemic, I think that air cargo is now really key to e-commerce because of the small capacity that we have on the aircrafts. We need to make sure that we are relevant, but e-commerce really needs air cargo to be able to reach the far end of the world. So with that, thank you very much. And I will just give the floor to Henk. Henk, you with us? Henk is not with us anymore. Yes, he is. Hello, Henk. I'll give you the floor, and I think that you will drive us through some integration, if I may. So I will have, unfortunately, to leave to
You're doing that.
reconnect.
Thank you very much for those that are still here with us. I will be talking a little bit about digitalization and e-commerce and what IATA does in that. You can go straight to the second slide if you want. It's just a pretty picture. This slide, or rather this picture, I picked up earlier this year, and this happens to be a stock chart of one of the biggest, the biggest e-commerce in the world. Others show similar pictures, but this tells a beautiful story. And the story it tells us is that up to about 2008, this particular company, sort of the stock price was hovering around, you can see relatively low to where it is today. And I refer to this as the electronic era. This is the era of electronic document interchange, or EDI. After that, e-commerce actually became a de-commerce, even though we didn't change the name. But what you can see there is that period from 2008 all the way to 2019, a very steady increase. The world was embracing e-commerce, but actually, in parallel with that, many companies were embracing digitalization. And one of the numbers that I think is an important one to remember is that in a couple of years, 25% of the global economy is going to be digital. And when we say that, that is really meaningful. We've just spent a couple of hours talking about, for example, air cargo mail processes, and most of that is still based on electronic documents, if not paper. And so this is I don't think anybody needs waking up here, but this is a bit of a wake-up call to any company that thinks that digitalization is an option or a potential strategy. It is not. It is a matter of survival if you still want to be around in a couple of years' time or in a decade from now. The next thing that is a beautiful illustration of what's been going on in the world of digitalization is the last 2 years. You see on this stock chart here, almost doubling, not quite, but almost doubling of the stock price of this e-commerce during the COVID pandemic. Andre already gave us the numbers, and we all know about the changing behavior of the consumer. But it also happens, and I speak for air cargo, I haven't researched other industries, but air cargo has seen a significant acceleration of digitalization. And people have often asked me, well, could you show me some evidence of that? Well, here it is. Here is a company that is very active within air cargo, and that has shown us what it really means. So these are our trends, and now companies have to respond to this. So what does that mean? Next slide, please, Andre. So what you see on the next slide is this is what you would need if you want to live in a world of e-commerce. And this is not specifically related to operations. It's related to literally anything. And if you think about it carefully, e-commerce companies are the true digital natives. These companies were born as digital platforms, and they will continue to work as digital platforms that live perhaps in a non-digital world, but that's not good enough. And so what do we need for proper e-commerce? I won't go through all the details in the interest of time, but it's clear that these companies and their partners in the supply chain need visibility of data. They need to be able to track their shipments. Data has to be fast. We don't have time to call each other up and ask for a status. Data needs to be shared. This is a very new thing that didn't exist 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. We can't survive in a digital economy if we don't get access to data. Otherwise, we'll have to duplicate it, triplicate it with all the problems that come with it. So sharing data is essential. Another one that is essential, and we'll see it on the next slide if you want to click, is how we need to expand our reach. The model with a cross through it is actually the EDI world. Now, you know, it's a bit rough perhaps for me to put a cross through it, but that's okay, because I live in the future, right? This is my job to make sure that we're ready for the future. So the world of EDI, where we share messages from one party to the next, is not compatible with the digital economy that we're getting ready for. And so what is possible solution there is to actually look at a direct data exchanges between all parties. And I kind of wrapped this thing up around one record, which is an IATA standard for data sharing, but it's not unique. There are other industries that take different approaches, and the concept is the same. The ability to directly connect with other partners, including, I see forwarders with 2 E's, but forwarders as well, of course. So the concept is here, direct access to information from other parties, regardless of where they are in the supply chain, where they are in your particular process, right? So basically shortcuts. Next slide, Andre. And so what you get if you do that, and I use the term one record because it's our standard, but it applies to anybody that is willing to invest in direct data access through data sharing. What you see is direct connectivity. That means that customers, authorities, anybody that needs to access data can sue directly through the internet. No need for intermediary organizations. And this is not actually bad news for the intermediaries because they're very active in this area as well. So there's no issue with that. The other thing, and this is perhaps the most important part of it all, is that in this case, I put the airline in the center, but it applies to any party. It provides complete visibility of anything that's happening upstream and downstream in the supply chain process, in the transport process, in the logistics process. And of course, if you have that sort of access and visibility, you can manage issues, you can be fast. This is the reality of using direct data sharing. And the last thing is that this is a domino effect when it comes to digital transformation. And I'll go into it a little bit later, so I won't spend time on it now. But if you start in one area, little by little, every other area becomes digitalized as well. Next slide, Andre. This is just a picture to show you how we are in terms of global deployment of this data sharing environment. Interestingly, you can see that as it happens, the main e-commerce markets pop out. In fact, what you can't see here, but I happen to know the numbers, that the vast majority of implementations are in Europe and a lot of them are in Germany, which is central to what's going on here. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is an interesting one. So when we started pushing for one record, we were in an environment of EDI. Okay, we still are, but certainly when we started, we were there. And as you might know, most of the interaction in EDI is in our world is airline, IT provider, and freight forwarder. What we have seen, and this was the objective, but we're seeing it as well, is that there's a long tail of other parties that is now building up. You can see the increase over the years. What we're seeing here is that airport authorities, industry groups, IoT device manufacturers, customs, trucking, and many others are actually realizing that the only way to move forward with digitalization and digital transformation is to cooperate in data sharing environments. And these numbers actually refer to companies that have implemented or are implementing this data sharing standard. Next slide, please. And here's another one that is an interesting one, another long tail that's building up. Initially, the focus of what record appears to be what we refer to as airport hubs or communities. In other words, the parties that really need to share the information for operational reasons. But you see a whole host of companies and rather use cases that are being added to this form of digitalization. Rock and road, that's interesting because we didn't really have that before. But if you go down, you see customers, you see pharma, you see CO2 tracking, you see distribution perishables. And what you're seeing here is that the use cases that you can cover once you start sharing data is ever expanding and not limited to the very narrow usage, which may have been the case in the EDI environment. Next slide, please. And so the only way for us to be able to meet that sort of challenge that was shown in the very first slide, where you could see the requirement, or rather the reality of the acceleration of digitalization, is cooperation. We're not in a position where we were 20 years ago, we could go it alone. We could develop standards as an airline industry, as separately, perhaps as the trucking industry, etc. E-commerce is a global phenomenon. It uses all transport modes. We may not talk about it during this conference, but that's the reality. There's far more going via maritime, perhaps, in terms of volume and weight than there is by air. That's the type of goods are changing. All of the logistics channels are engaged. Many types of shippers, large and small, are involved, and of course, all the customer segments as well. And so the only way forward is cooperation both in terms of sharing data, sharing processes, but also working with organizations that are pursuing similar directions in order to support e-commerce within their portfolios, whether it's standards or solution providers, etc. Cooperation is the key word here. And with that keyword, I finish my presentation. Andre, back to you.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you very much. Indeed, cooperation, collaboration, digitalization, integration, all these words are regulation. All these words are extremely data sharing. All this is really resonating, I think, in our heads. I think we do understand very well what lies ahead. We've been talking about that for a long time. We've seen that it has accelerated in the last years. And honestly, everyone should jump on board the plane, not the train, but the plane, and make sure that you participate, of course, in all of these initiatives and make sure that you still remain relevant, because other companies are going really fast. So again, thank you. I would like to thank all the speakers that took part in this webinar. Really appreciate your contribution. I think it was absolutely relevant. I also thank all the participants for joining, and again, my apologies for running late. I really appreciate that you've stayed so long. We will publish the webinar, the recording, and all the questions and answers within a week on our website. So I'll let you know also to make sure that you can have access to that. And finally, well, thank you, Jan, again for your cooperation. Thank you, UPU. And I will just let you close this webinar. Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you very much.